Welcome to the first ever virtual brown bag lunch hosted by the early career scholars of ASOR entitled Online Teaching from Triage to Best Practices. As many of you know, those of you who attend our annual meeting every year, the Brown Bag Luncheon is the signature event at the ASOR annual meeting for our early career scholars. Well, this year we've decided to go ahead and offer a virtual one, this time on the very relevant topic of online teaching and learning. In spring 2020, we all became the unwitting alumni of a Zoom university, united in our newfound and somewhat emergency-based interest in online education. At the same time, this has become an opportunity for all of us to learn new things, which, after all, is a situation that plays to our strengths as educators. Today's Brown Bag is organized as a panel discussion with a variety of experts speaking on various topics related to online education. Each panelist will introduce her or himself and then give a brief overview of their areas of expertise. For those who attend the live session, you'll be able to ask the panelists questions. For those of you watching the session on the ASOR YouTube channel, a handout is available with additional resources. You can find a link to the handout available in the comments.
Hi everyone, my name is Sarah Norris and I am the Scholarly Communication Librarian at the University of Central Florida. In my role, I help faculty and students navigate a variety of topics, including publishing, open access, and copyright, which we're going to discuss today. In particular, I help faculty navigate the online course environment and understanding copyright, fair use, and licensing concerns in their online courses. I also work with our instructional designers like Jim Paradiso, who's on today's panel, as well as our subject librarians who provide a variety of subject expertise to assist faculty in these particular areas. When it comes to intellectual property, academic institutions do interpret this in many ways differently than others. So while we have general principles, some institutions may not take the same sort of stance about things like fair use and the use of copyrighted materials in the same ways. So you do want to check with your institution, your Office of General Counsel, librarians who have expertise in copyright, as well as copyright policies and procedures locally at your institution to adhere to those particular recommendations when it comes to copyright and intellectual property, especially when we're teaching online. So with that in mind, the first thing that we do want to consider when we're thinking about online courses is fair use. So that's really being able to use copyrighted content in limited ways in our online course. And I think many of us are really familiar with fair use in the context of being able to use it in our face-to-face classrooms. We do have the face-to-face teaching exception under copyright law, and I think many of us are really familiar with that, being able to use those materials the ways that we need to in that face-to-face course. But how do you translate that to the online course? So in online courses, it can be a little bit trickier because there are sometimes a bit more restrictions when it comes to using copyrighted content under the guise of fair use. So you do always want to consider that. Do check with your local policies whether the recommendation is to adhere to something called the 4 fair use factors, which helps us understand if what we're using for our online courses does fall under fair use, or whether or not there are specific percentages or other types of things that our institution recommends we do when navigating fair use. So you do always want to check locally with your institution, but do know that fair use is available to you when you're considering teaching your online course, but that it might just look a bit different than how we use it when we're teaching face-to-face. And with that in mind, I think one of the biggest questions that I've been getting right now is, how do you transition a face-to-face course really rapidly during these sort of exigent circumstances right now with the COVID-19 pandemic and make sure that you're okay under copyright law? And thankfully, copyright interpretations and fair use interpretations nationally is providing a bit more flexibility during these sort of strange and difficult circumstances to be able to be more flexible with the materials that you need to use in your course under the guise of fair use. So while there's not one specific answer about, yes, you can scan that entire textbook, or yes, you can upload a specific video to your course, we do have a bit more flexibility because we understand that right now things are challenging, things might be inaccessible, and so we want to make sure that we don't hinder the teaching and learning process. So certainly check with your librarians and your Office of General Counsel to see, what materials you need to use, how we can assist you in making sure that you can use them without having to worry too much about the fair use process. And then lastly, this was one point that I think many people don't necessarily consider, is the intellectual property of your actual course itself online. So this means, do you or do you not own your online course materials? At UCF, we have fairly flexible intellectual property interpretation. So our teaching faculty own the intellectual property of their course, so things like their syllabus, quizzes, and other ancillary materials, but they may not necessarily own the actual Canvas shell. So we use Canvas at UCF. So anything that's in that Canvas shell is technically the intellectual property of the institution. So there's some nuance to that, but if you are wanting to know what do you own or what don't you own when it comes to your online course, do check with your institution to understand through your collective bargaining agreement and your Office of General Counsel who actually owns your course content. So there are a variety of things to consider when it comes to intellectual property. This is just a very quick discussion of that, but know that you have librarians, lawyers, and other resources at your institution to help you navigate the complexities of intellectual property and your online teaching and learning.
Hi, my name is Rassalle, and I am a PhD student at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And I have been teaching online classes for the past 2.5 years now. I teach online classes through what is called the Friday Center, which is associated with UNC. So I teach an online class every semester and in the summer. So in the handout, the Google Doc with all the resources that I've written out, I have put up a couple of specific resources that you could use for your students for online classes. So the first one that I put up there is the way to do video captioning. So if you're going to upload videos of yourself, you might want to have subtitles underneath for people who have issues hearing what you're saying. And also, as you can hear, I'm an international person. I always prefer to read subtitles along with what I'm hearing and being said to me, just so it's easier to understand what is happening. For example, a student might be normally sitting in front of the class because they can hear you well when they're sitting in the front row, but at home that might be different, or it might be difficult with people around. You might have recorded something with a lot of background noise. So I would advise you to search and find out how you can put captioning on your videos. I know that Zoom and YouTube and some other software have an option where you can automatically check off that they will add captioning either at the bottom of your screen or on the sides, that people can follow along with your lecture. The opposite of that is OCR text recognition. So that's the opposite. It's where you have a written out document and a voice, a computer will read it out to you. So there are these websites, and I put them on the handout, where you can upload any document, a PDF, a Word doc, whatever, and then the computer will actually read it out to you. So all you have to do is listen to what they're saying. So for people who might have visual issues, for people who cannot read on a screen for too long, etc., it might be easier for them to just sit back and listen to what is being said. That software is very useful to use. And I put a couple of links of free websites that you can use on the documents. Another thing is when you are building a website or a page and you have a lot of pictures on there, there is a way, or an official way, to do picture captioning. So a descriptive text of what you're seeing on the picture. Put a link on there on the website too of the official way of writing alt text descriptions of images. And the last thing I want to point out to you is a resource that reads your website and reads it, make sure that everything is visible to the students. Again, for people who are colorblind, who have some visual issues, it will point out, for example, well, the contrast between these two colors is not bright enough, so somebody would not be able to read it. We don't always think about that. We just make a website or web page and it looks pretty. But then that website, if you upload your page, will tell you, look, there's an issue here. That might not be visible. This font is too small and somebody would not be able to read that. Are you sure that you put in a certain way of making thumbnails bigger for people who can't see the little ones, etc., etc. So they help you point out what might be wrong with your web page. So all of this is very useful. And then again, I would reach out and see what they need. They could have, for example, the same problem where they would want more extension, a longer time for their exam. We use at UNC a platform called Sakai for our students, but I know in Blackboard and other software that you use, there is a possibility to put in how long students have to take a certain exam. So you can individually for each student say, okay, this person will have 1 hour to complete the exam, this person will have 2 hours, depending on what they need. So that might be a way to fix it. There might also people who still need to do an oral exam that you can now do over Zoom. That would be easy for them. So I recommend you to take a look at that handout and talk to your students and see what they need.
Hello, my name is Jim Paradiso, and I'm an instructional designer at the University of Central Florida. So today I was invited to talk to you a little bit about course design and going online, kind of what that looks like. So based on the slide that you can see here, I'll touch on 4 topics. First one will be synchronous versus asynchronous course design and course delivery. So the major difference, right, is synchronous is, think, real time, whereas asynchronous is not real time. So it's something that you may have recorded and made available for students at a later date. So what are the advantages? Synchronous is obviously going to give you that sort of live feel, allows there to be some ebb and flow in a conversation, and it's much more personable, creating and helpful in creating community. However, the negative would probably be with synchronous is getting everyone in the same place at the same time, especially in times like these that we're experiencing. So when you're debating between whether to do asynchronous or synchronous, just take into consideration that even if your class may have met face-to-face in the past and now is moving online, people may have some circumstances, whether it's time zone or just health, that will prevent them from being available. One other thing to mention about synchronous that could be a consideration to take for asynchronous as well, but is Wi-Fi connection and the ability to stream something and have multiple videos or just audio, or potentially receive and be able to participate the way they'd like in that time. So keep in mind, Wi-Fi connections vary and access to the bandwidth varies. Moving to asynchronous. Asynchronous is going to give you a little more flexibility insofar as planning. You can take a more calculated approach to delivering an asynchronous class. You do miss out on some of that, the live back and forth that you can have with students. So there is potential for them to not understand material and not have an immediate way to get that question answered. So that's a negative, but on a positive, they do have a little more time to cognitively process what you're delivering to them, and they can play it back repeatedly, at least in that moment. So that's a little bit about synchronous and asynchronous. Moving to the second item, flipped classrooms. Flipped classrooms can be understood a few different ways, but let's put it in context of maybe a mixed mode or a blended class. So what flipped classroom basically would mean would be that you'd provide students materials that they can do asynchronously, right, outside of class to prepare. And then when you're in class, you can do that sort of synchronous thing, face-to-face, of doing some critical thinking or some projects or something that's highly communicative and requires dialogue in the moment. That would be a flip classroom environment. It's effective when you do have application to maybe some more theoretical concepts. You don't have to go over that theoretical in class. You can use your class time to sort of take what they've learned or hope that they can, having learned something asynchronously, come and apply it in the classroom. That takes me to the third point, rethinking the 1.5 hour lecture. So no matter what lecture time you might set aside for your classes, we know, scientifically speaking, that the attention span, I mean, between 8 and 15 minutes, you're potentially losing people from a biological standpoint, and they're losing their attention. So that said, it's especially important with online learning, but even face-to-face. You'll want to, as much as possible, chunk your content into segments. Try to make digestible chunks, just because also, we know from cognitive load theory, right, that dumping too much information without some sort of break, it will also potentially cause students to be able to tune out, because there's just too much information coming in at one time. So if they can't pause, your video, they can, if you're doing online learning, but in face-to-face, right, they can't. So this applies to both mediums, I think, whether it's online or face-to-face. You want to try to chunk up your content, give students a cognitive break to be able to apply or think or analyze what you said. And so building that in, it will be important. So any way you can do that, you should try. And lastly, how do you get content from one place to another, from either a publishing house to a student, from your own, brain to a student, from your own course into a student's hands? These resources vary in price and in quality. So when we talk about open educational resources, we're talking about something that's knowledge that has been decidedly shared openly on the web, publicly, or in physical form as well, that can be remixed and reused and revised and sort of crafted to accommodate your current situation. So an open educational resource is a very sort of community, a way to share your intellectual property, so to speak, in a more communal way, and not locking it behind some paid subscription. So that's how you can participate in the open sort of movement. And then you can also take advantage of a lot of open educational resources that are available online, that you can just Google your discipline and put open educational resources after it. So like marketing, open educational resources, and then see what pops up. There are a few repositories. A big one, George Mason University has a MOM repository. OpenStax has a lot of titles. Open Textbook Network, and there are more. The Oasis search tool and Merlot. There are quite a few where you can just go in there and type in keywords and take a look and see what you find. So open is a very important part of disseminating information freely and openly. And so in times especially of financial concerns potentially during this crisis in which we're delivering this presentation, it's extra important because we don't know the financial wherewithal of our students or the families that were our students. So anyways, thank you for your time. Thank you for listening to me, and take care.
Hello, I am your fourth and final panelist today. My name is Tiffany Earley-Spadoni. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Central Florida. I've been teaching online in various modalities for 5 years now. I teach 4 classes, all online or in mixed mode formats, in addition to face-to-face courses. Among the online classes that I teach and relevant to the concerns of ASOR are an Ancient Near Eastern Societies class, as well as a Mesopotamian history class. In addition to these, I teach online courses on other methodological topics like spatial history as well as digital storytelling. Today, I'd like to talk about some best practices in terms of some quick tips that you can apply, you can adapt to your own online classroom environment right now or today. The first of these is the importance of requiring weekly engagement. In a face-to-face class, you may have gotten into the habit over some years or semesters of requiring a midterm and a final. This is a pretty common way of assessing progress. However, in an online environment in which students don't have that once or twice a week check-in moment of presenting themselves in class, it becomes even more vitally important to include more opportunities for engagement. This can be through a low-stakes assignment. It can be a discussion post, a brief quiz, etc. It's also really important that your students feel like you are present in your course. And obviously this has to happen digitally. But this can take a variety of different formats. You can check in once a week by making a short video. You can do a course announcement. You can send everyone an email. It's just even more important to let the students know that you're there and engaged and willing to help. It's always important to be explicit, but even more so online. So I like to let them know about my expectations as clearly as possible, down to the number of hours per week that they should ideally be spending on the course, as well as how long it takes me to respond. For example, I tell them that I will typically respond to all messages within 2 business days. Taking a class online can provoke a bit more anxiety than taking a face-to-face or in-person class. So if I let students know, for example, that it may take me 48 hours to get back to them, that can help ease some of their concerns. They know that a little bit of a wait time is normal. Another area where we can be more explicit in how we are aligning our educational objectives with learning outcomes as well as assessments is how we express learning objectives and assessment methods with students in an online course. I find it can be incredibly helpful rather than stating some broad educational outcomes in a syllabus to instead break those down week by week to communicate to students more clearly and effectively what the goals are in this entire educational journey. The final opportunity presented to us by online course teaching involves grading, which is often a pain point for instructors. But online grading might in fact change your life for the better because it gives us the opportunity to create electronic rubrics of common items that we say over and over again in student feedback and simply select those in a few seconds on a screen rather than writing them over and over again. Finally, I'd like to conclude today by thanking Eric Welch, who is my Early Career Scholars co-chair, who had this great idea of doing the virtual seminar today, as well as the other committee members, Vanessa Workman, Pedro Creamer, and Owen Chestnut, who contributed to its success. I hope we'll have many more of these.